I am Rondell Gibson. I am the North Bay Director of College Access.
Hello, everyone. My name is Haley Waters. My pronouns are she and her. I am the Program Manager for the Santa Rosa Junior College cohort.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tanya Rakenes. I'm the Program Director of Community College Success. Glad to have you all here.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Carla Santiago, pronouns they, she, ella. I'm the For Success and Alumni Director here with 10,000 Degrees, and I've been a part of the org for the past 4 years.
The focus of today is to continue what we were touching upon yesterday, also to go into a little bit more detail, to review some things, make sure everyone has an understanding of financial aid, give you some tips. Like I said, we're gonna do a brief overview again, and then we're gonna go into depth and allow for a lot more questions today. So let's go ahead. So the reason why we're here today is to make sure that we learn what we need to around financial aid to help our students. We also are going to touch on some scholarship requirements and the reason why FAFSA and California Dream Act are still needed for that. And then we're also going to talk about if students can qualify for lower interest rates, talk about many colleges requiring students to do a FAFSA or California Dream Act in order to be considered just for institutional aid. All scholarship departments are also, or agencies and organizations are also now asking students to show the proof of a FAFSA or have filled one out so they can determine how much they should give students. So we're going to cover that today as well. So a quick review. So we talked about where does financial aid come from? So these are the various sources of money. So let's think federal. Federal will be hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on financial aid. The FAFSA, free application for federal student aid. And then we have our state government. This is more like close to just millions. And then this is for students who can complete a California Dream Act as well as a FAFSA. And then we have colleges and universities. These are the institutions our students are applying to. They also have their own pool of funding and resources of money that they can offer to students and families as well. And then of course, we talked about the miscellaneous sources, third parties such as like 10,000 Degrees and other institutions that give money, such as like the McDonald's Foundation and Bill Gates Foundation and a number of other ones. In case you're wondering what makes up a financial aid package, we like to break it down first by listing them in 3 categories: for gift aid, work, and loans. Now there's a difference between the 3. Gift aid, definitely looking upon as grants and scholarships, is also can be looked upon as money being given to a student that they wanted to save or have saved over the years. And then we have work, and there's 2 categories of work. There's work study for students who qualify for work study, which the money they earn on working on campus can be used to pay for cost of attendance. And then there's just regular work where students can get a job like working for Safeway or working for Starbucks or Home Depot or whatever it may be, and then use that to pay for their education as well. The cool thing about work study is that the federal government helps the student by paying for most of their wages and then not taxing them. So we a lot of times want our students to work under work study. It's also more flexible around their school schedule. And then we have our last category we want everybody to consider when thinking about how to pay for college is loans. Now, we believe that loans are the worst case, but yet they're sometimes needed. And there are some loans that are better than others, and we will go into those details as well. Now, we talked about a FAFSA being for students who have a Social Security number or are residents of residents here in the United States of California. These students will be considered for federal funding, which we showed yesterday, Pell Grant and CR Grant. And then they have access to like work study from the federal system. And our students who are going to be applying to California Dream Act, these are for students who meet the requirements of California Dream Act, meaning that they've been going to school in California for at least 3 years or a year, and then have done schooling somewhere else for at least 2, and then come back to finish in California, or just done all 3 years in California. And then they will use this application, and this will qualify them for the Cal grants and any institutional aids that are offered within California, as well as any loans that the state schools will like to offer these students. It also offers them the ability to do a work study program as well, which has a volunteer component attached to it. Now, what we have here is just some quick tips. We're definitely want students to know that they need to apply for sure. And then when applying for financial aid, we need to use full name, full birth name, one that's going to match the birth certificate, social security number. We'll also need personal contacts. So we ask that students use a personal email address, not a school email, their most recent or updated phone number. And then for students like males, we'll have to register for selective service. So these students will have to do this via an application online, or they can go into the post office to do that. And this is only for males. Number 5, we have our work study. We want all students, when filling out their FAFSA or California Dream Act, there's going to be a section which asks if you want to be considered for work study. And we tell students all the time to say yes, even if they don't know that they're going to do work study. You want to be considered in order to get it. And if you don't get it in your first year, it's very difficult to get it in the second, third, fourth, fifth, and so on years. Also, know that if you're filling out a FAFSA, you can only plug in 10 schools at one time. And then once your FAFSA has been completed, typically within 2 days, you can log back in and add additional schools after removing some of the old schools. We also recommend that when families are filling out their financial aid application, they list at least one California school. All right, and then we have, we want to recommend that everyone use the IRS data retrieval tool. Mind you, this data retrieval tool is only for the families and students that are going to be applying via FAFSA. Here's just some general information. Here's a timeline around financial aid, but know that typically we start with financial aid October 1st with being able to fill out an application. Yesterday, I spoke about FERPA and how if anyone's worried about information being shared, I know that all information pertaining to the student is solely given to the student and not shared with any of the relatives outside or with any other agencies unless the student is allowing that. Now, what we did not talk about yesterday was CSS Profile. Now, this application is another financial aid application, and it is actually for students that will be applying to private schools and some schools that are out of state as well. So this application opens October 1st. Now, if a student is wondering if they should fill out a CSS profile, they're going to want to contact the financial aid department of the schools they're applying to, as well as they could possibly check the list on College Board. There's a list of schools that are participating. This application is done via the College Board. The one thing about the CSS profile that's different than the California Dream Act and different than the FAFSA is that this is the one application that costs money. So it's $25 for the first time doing the app, and then $16 to send this application to each school. Now, there are fee waivers, and that is embedded within the application as the student begins to answer questions about their finances as well as assets. So you may be asking, why CSS Profile? Why are schools asking for families to do this in addition to the other financial aid forms? Well, the one thing that the CSS Profile takes into account are some expenses. And that's one thing that FAFSA and California, the Dream Act, does not take into account, is the family's household costs and expenses. So that's one cool thing, is the CSS Profile is looking at the family holistically. They're looking for a well-rounded picture of what the family really spends, earns, and what they may have to shell out for the student's education. Here on this application, families will need a lot of information. They ask for things like registration to vehicles, years of vehicles, how much is in a savings account, a flexible savings account, retirement, this year's income, and they want to know about next year's projected income as well as year before last. So I encourage anyone who has students that will be applying to private schools that will be participating in the CSS Profile to get their paperwork in order now, as it can be a headache when you're beginning to fill this out and looking for it later. There's another component to the CSS Profile for single parents. There's a part that's going to ask for a non-custodial parent, and that information meaning the non-custodial parent, meaning the other parent who the student isn't living with. They're going to need their information, so they have to create an account as well. The great thing about the CSS Profile is that they offer a list, they offer support via the phone, as well as they do have helpful videos on their website. Applying to CSS Profile. So yes, it may not list that the school requires a CSS Profile on the school's website. So that's why I asked earlier to have students reach out by phone or via email. I talked about there being a waiver in this application. It's automatic. Students will know if they have to pay.
Good morning, everybody. So now we're gonna deep dive into language and creating safe spaces with different populations of students that you may be working with throughout these next couple months. And specifically right now is working with our families who are undocumented. There's power in the language that we use as educators, and part of that, there is a difference in what students hear from us and their families by extension with the words that we use in as we're supporting them as they're filing their application. Saying filling out the FAFSA is super important can be accurate for some students, but not everybody is eligible for this application. And so there is a power in being able to say filling out the financial aid application is super important because it encompasses all walks of life and different documentation status for our students. And so there is preferred language that we always offer our staff at 10,000 degrees and our communities to be using. This preferred language is using the financial aid application versus just using the terminology of just FAFSA. Financial aid application encompasses all the applications that are out there that our students are able to apply, and it allows them to see the different forms that exist. I always tell my staff, if you're going to use the acronym of FAFSA, it's always lumped with using the word CADA or vice versa, CADA and FAFSA or FAFSA and CADA. And so it makes a difference when our students and families hear, like, let's open that financial aid application. Have you submitted your financial aid application? Because we can't assume what application they are using as you're first starting to work with them throughout this application season. And so as you're working on creating more inclusive language and using that preferred language of financial aid, it's also important as an educator to be aware of the safe spaces that you are creating for the students and families that you are supporting throughout these next couple months. Being sensitive to the conversation that you will be holding with them and creating that private space for them to be able to feel comfortable in disclosing their different identities, their journeys that they have come across to get to this point to being able to apply for financial aid throughout these next couple months. We highly encourage, if you are able to make that private space available, to do so that they're not at earshot of other individuals that may use their personal information for other use. If you are working in a classroom setting, and we know that at times this is inevitable when we are hosting these large financial aid nights and such throughout the next couple months, to use non-identifying questions and wording when asking them what application they are either completing or asking them those probing questions to figure out what application is right for them. And so we understand that there are those large classroom settings, and so being aware of the language we use is key. And so as we are creating these safe spaces, it's also a helpful tip to know that there are times when our students aren't aware that they are undocumented, or by extension, their parents are and may be coming from a mixed status family. And so as you're holding these spaces, it's important for you to create that warm and welcoming environment for them so that they know that there is an option for them to receive aid. And there's different pathways to take throughout these next couple of months. As you're supporting them and what application is best fit for them. And so whether it's in a private setting or in a large workshop setting, as we're doing these financial aid nights, being aware of the language we use is key as we're supporting each student in their process. And so as you are learning more about the student, as you are learning more about their family and guardian background, privacy is key. And it's something that we always work to destigmatize when working with our families, especially when they are undocumented. I know we've talked about in detail about FERPA, this Privacy Act that protects the student education records, really breaking that down for parents and guardians, breaking that down for our students so that they understand that they can trust these applications that they are submitting, and to really destigmatize that fear of that information being shared with the Department of Homeland Security, and knowing that FERPA does protect them and their privacy as they're filling out these applications. And so we're talking to them, breaking it down, and really reassuring them that these applications can be trusted as they're filling them out. As an educator, it's always helpful to remind our students any follow-up steps they may be taking, especially when you're doing follow-up with CADA, making sure that when they are going to be attending that campus that they decided for, is that they submit their Ab540 affidavit. Also for our male individuals who have to enlist for the selective service, is providing that space and doing that follow-up and mailing in their forms. And that can even look like of even providing them that stamp and that envelope, helping them figure out how to write that envelope. This is a younger generation. And so being able to do that follow-up of these are your checklist items after our meeting today, and doing that intentional follow-up with them, that they do have these additional next steps that they have to do when they are enrolling to their college campuses in the next couple of months. Other helpful tips, I know I've said it in various ways, of using that inclusive language and meeting the students where they're at. When getting started, explain both applications. And I know Itza deep dove into that yesterday and explaining the differences in the different applications, explaining the different options that these students have, and being conscious of what knowledge do they need in order to make that best decision on what application to be filling out. As you're doing this, being aware of the body language that the student or family may be representing at that moment. Is there those signs of nervousness? Is there a bit of shyness? Is there that confusion? As you're creating these safe spaces, as you're working in these large workshop settings, being aware of body language is key, because it can give you some markers of like, maybe let me ask some more probing question, or let me re-explain the information I just gave them, so that they're fully processing the knowledge that you are sharing with them. Another tidbit is when there is that hesitation to answer any questions, that may be a sign for them wanting a more private space. Okay, maybe it's working from a specific office, or working in a different area in these large workshop spaces. Maybe it's taking a corner towards like the side, to make sure that the space that they are in, as they're disclosing these very personal parts of their journeys to you, that they feel comfortable enough with the space that's being provided and the language that is being used with them. And so what if a student's parents are in a different country? As these students are disclosing with you their different journeys, a student is still required to provide their income and assets for that parent, even if they're in a different country, and it's supporting them in converting that parent's income from their home currency to US dollar currency. So it's helping them do that math to be able to add to their application. There may be instances where it's not safe to be in contact with that parent or guardian in a different country. And we always recommend that the student contacts their school's financial aid office, and doing that follow-up of making sure that the financial aid office will inform the students of what those next steps are, and what making sure that the student is also understanding what those steps are, and supporting them as they're navigating this additional step to their process of figuring out their financial aid. Most times it has to be a court-ordered document that they need to show that their either parents are out of the area, or that they're unaccompanied. And so making sure that there are all the documentation needed for the space for them to be able to file as accurately as possible to figure out what their aid is. And so when we are in these instances that there is additional information needed, is helping them really just break down what the language is being used from these different sources, and unpacking, okay, what are my next steps? Do I understand what is on my checklist? Can you write it in your own words? And can I help you really just break down maybe some of the stress and fear that they may be feeling. And as an educator, is making it seem like it is those baby steps that they can take towards being able to get all the accurate information they need in order to find the best route to completing their financial aid application. And so now we're going to deep dive into working with our foster youth and homeless or at risk of being homeless youth. I know we talked about it a little bit more in detail on that being independent or dependent students. These students are considered as independent for their financial aid purposes. They provide their personal and financial information for themselves, and parent guardian info is not required. There's eligibility for the Chiefy Grant, and the schools will request that legal documentation as they identify with these identities. So if they're homeless or unaccompanied youth, they select yes if at any time after July 1st, 2021, the student is an unaccompanied youth who is either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. And so now let's break that down a little bit more in detail, what that exactly means. A homeless or at risk of being homeless, they're lacking fixed, regular, and adequate housing, and that includes their living in shelters, hotels, motels, parks, in a public space. It may be in camping grounds, abandoned buildings, temporarily living with other people because these students have nowhere else to go. If they're unaccompanied, they're not living in the physical custody of a parent or guardian, and youth means that they're under the age of 24. If they are foster youth, they answer yes if at any time since they turned the age of 13, he or she were in the foster care. And this even includes if they are currently not in the foster care system today, but they were for, let's say, a day, and they were able to exit out of the system due to adoption, reunification, or they reached the age of maturity of 18 years here in California. Again, re-emphasizing documentation will be required to be providing to the schools of their attendance. So just be aware that in any of these instances, documentation will be needed for our youth. And so these individuals are also eligible for the Chiefy Grant. I know we deep dove into this yesterday in detail. It opens in October 1st and it closes in March 2nd. It's an additional support that they receive to their Cal Grant, and it's for our current or former foster youth within the ages of 16 to 18. They are eligible for this, and I think the one big emphasis I always have is this is an additional aid that they receive to their Cal Grant as they are completing their applications. And so please just be aware that if you do have current or former foster youth, that this is an additional support that they receive as individuals. And so when you are creating these spaces, holding these conversations with your different students, just always be aware of that body language, the language that you use, so that it is inclusive as you're creating that space with them. And they're really trusting you with all this information on the journeys that they have really come across throughout these past couple years. And so being mindful of that space and that safe space looking differently every time.
Okay, great. Thank you, Carla. So now we're going to be moving on to web grants for students. And yesterday I talked about the different types of grants, like the Cal Grant, Middle Class Scholarship. Carla just talked about Chiefy, and then some of the other new access awards, like the award for students who have dependents or those that complete the California Dream Act and are doing community service. And so this is where students manage those grants. It's my grant info at csac.california.gov, and students can create a web grants account 1 week after the student has submitted either the FAFSA or the California Dream Act. And this is just really important, again, because this is where they log in to manage these different accounts. There are some steps that students need to take. Students need to confirm the school of attendance. They need to verify their graduation date. And if they, for some reason, need to put their grants on hold, they would submit a leave of absence. And so This is, again, a step that students can take a week after submitting their financial aid applications. And down below, there are some new features. WebGrants does look a little bit different. There's new settings to do the password recovery, username recovery. There's also some helpful videos on how to do that. When students create the WebGrants account, if they completed the California Dream Act, they do need to know that ID number. If they completed the FAFSA, they'll need the Social Security number, and then they'll want to use their name that they listed on the FAFSA or California Dream Act application, because those names need to match. It's connected after submitting the FAFSA or California Dream Act, it's connected to the WebGrants account. Okay, and so these are just some helpful contact information if students have trouble logging into their accounts, if there was a discrepancy and the system's not finding them. This, I'll talk about it a little bit later, but like when there's a name mismatch or there is inconsistent identifiers, that creates challenges for our students. But again, we will be sharing this slide deck, and if you just want to take a picture, people that work for California Student Aid Commission have been really friendly. We really like to work with them because they really support us working with students, and we'll have the student on the phone. And they also have Spanish speaking individuals who can support students with step-by-step instructions. When students log into WebGrants, they do need to verify their GPA. And again, the high schools will do this, or the community colleges, but it'll be a check mark next to GPA verification. And if that check mark is not there, it's an indicator that GPA has not been submitted or it hasn't been verified. And again, that could be several reasons. It could be a name mismatch. Yeah, we usually see name mismatches. That's, I think, the number one thing that we see. The high school has one name, and the application has a different last name or first name. There's a mismatch somehow. Students also will come across like a red stop sign, and this is an indicator that they need to verify that they've graduated high school. And it'll ask just for the month and year. After they've selected I've graduated, it will prompt them for the date and then confirming the school, because the school that it defaults to is usually the first one on the FAFSA California Dream Act. And so if a student, has decided to go elsewhere, or sometimes they select to go to community college as opposed to a 4-year, they need to update that information so that that aid can be sent to the financial aid office. Again, this is where the student can make sure that the name is correct, listed correctly. And if there's also an address change, email changes, this is where they would update it. Sometimes we see students use their high school email, and then when they graduate, that is no longer available and can't access it. And then that's where we have to do a lot of password retrievals and updating, and that takes some time. And so just recommend again that students write their passwords, their usernames. There are some security questions that the students can also include for that retrieval purpose. But again, if students aren't logging into WebGrants verifying that they're graduating, listing the school of attendance, this is going to delay their financial aid disbursements. And for the Cal Grant, the Chiefy, that's hundreds to thousands of dollars that they could be missing out on. Some other forms to keep in mind is the G55 form. And so if a student accidentally completed the FAFSA and they were supposed to do the California Dream Act, we recommend that you fill out this G55 form, and this will honor the priority deadline of March 2nd. Because if they have to submit it after that deadline, then they're not meeting that priority deadline. And so we also see this when there's a status change and a student is now eligible to apply for FAFSA through either green card or residency status. And this is, again, the form that they would change. Sometimes we see this in the middle of the year or after the March 2nd. But again, this is just the form to convert that and honor the priority deadline. The other thing I wanted to mention is the leave of absence too. And so this is really important because if a student is attending community college, for example, or a 4-year and are going to be, beyond the 4 years, because for Cal Grant, that's the maximum year. It's 4 years or 8 semesters. But if they're going to be at a community college for like 3 years, we really recommend that students also place that leave of absence. They want to take the aid, but also want to save part of that for transfer purposes, because it does, their aid could increase based off the cost of attendance, financial aid eligibility. And so we want students to maximize on their aid. Okay, and so now just some of the most common challenges, some of them I've already mentioned. So students not confirming that they are graduating or the month and the year that they're graduating. And again, this will delay financial aid disbursement. Incorrect college listed on the financial aid application. And so as students are getting financial aid award packages from the schools, they'll see that I'm missing the Cal Grant. I don't see this type of aid. And so this is where, again, Web Grants is really helpful for students in managing their accounts, their amounts that they're receiving. And this is the big one that we see, is students not checking the website or creating an account or even checking the emails that they're receiving from CSAC. And so just checking and monitoring Web Grants every year, because every year the student will renew financial aid, and this is where they can check the remaining eligibility, the award amount, and the awards that they're receiving. Another one is students don't remember the California Dream Act ID, and so they'll have to log into the California Dream Act ID. Upper right-hand side, they'll see their name and that ID. And again, they'll need that ID in order to create the Web Grants account or their social security number. And sometimes students don't know their social security number either. And again, students are going to need this info for retrieval purposes if they can't remember their username and password. And then missing signature on the California Dream Act application. And so again, an application, the financial aid application is incomplete unless the signatures are submitted. And that goes for the FAFSA as well, whether that's a parent paper signature that they're mailing in or an electronic one. High school GPA not verified. Again, this is something the student wants to check back in with their high school because this is all done electronically. And again, it's probably an indicator that there was a name mismatch or a date of birth mismatch as well. Okay, frequently asked questions that we get. How long can I get the Cal Grant Award? That's 4 years, 8 semesters. And again, keeping in mind if a student is going, and it's likely that we see a lot of our students going to community college and are there more than 2 years, placing that Cal Grant on hold. And that's really important through the leave of absence, because again, we want them to maximize their aid when they transfer so that they have that. We have seen students, unfortunately, max out on their Cal Grant while at community college. They transfer, aren't eligible for that Cal Grant, and then they're having to apply to private scholarships, institutional aid to fill that need. And so again, just keep letting them know through Web Grants, this is where they can manage the remaining eligibility and the award amounts. Can I receive multiple awards? Students can receive like the Cal Grant and Chiefy or some of those other access awards we talked about yesterday, but they wouldn't be able to get like the Cal Grant and middle class scholarship, because the middle class scholarship is for those that don't qualify for Cal Grant A or B. Is this the same as state university grant? So the answer is no, just as Rondell pointed out. University grant, this is institutional aid. So this is sometimes confused by students. They'll say, oh, this is my Cal Grant, but it'll read like San Diego State Grant. And so that is different. And so just being aware when reading the financial aid award letters that students get, institutional versus state aid. And again, should I defer? Again, we really recommend it for those attending community colleges or for those students who are maybe going to take a semester off. They can place that semester on hold through that leave of absence option. And if students are unsure, we recommend that they talk to us, that they talk to their financial aid offices, because they can also support them in making these decisions. And again, our goal is that students maximize on their aid. Students sometimes take pictures of them, but then the space is full or they've lost that picture. And so it just will expedite the time when you're working with them and you're ready to log in. I think password retrievals is the most time consuming in this process. And then contact CSAC, they are really helpful. So when in doubt, when you need additional support, calling them. When it's their busy time, you can also ask to speak with someone in Spanish, but they also speak English. And so we found that helpful in just getting through those phone lines a little bit quicker.
So we're going to talk about financial aid verification. So what exactly is it? It's when your school is going to ask the student for additional documents to verify the information they reported on their FAFSA or California Dream Act application. So they just want to make sure that everything is copacetic, everything is lining up. And how does a student know if they are being verified? The school will add a to-do list item to their college portal or their financial aid portal. So sometimes that's a hiccup for students and they don't know to look in that portal. So just make sure that you're guiding your students that way. and they're checking it almost daily to ensure that they know what their to-do list items are and there's no holdups. So what exactly gets verified? The income reported on the financial aid application will get verified. So that means the tax transcripts or the W-2s. So sometimes we have students and or parents that do not file taxes. So the financial aid office is going to request that they submit W-2s. So household size, this is also a form that's provided by the school to verify that what the student put on their financial aid application is correct. And sometimes, just a note, I've seen students skip the question on the financial aid application regarding parent information, which asks about the household size, and then the financial aid office will follow back up with them. So if there's ever a moment that a student clicks, no, I don't want to add the parent information, then you want to just let them know, hey, the financial aid is going to ask you these questions later, so it's good to fill that out now. The only reason that a student wouldn't fill that out is if they are considered to be independent. So the independent factors are if the student is a foster youth, if they are married, if they have a legal guardianship, or if they have children, or if they are 24 years old. So just a note about that turning 24, I always like to ask a student when their birthday is. And if they happen to be turning 24 in that next academic year, you're going to know that they're going to be independent and they won't have to give that parent information. So that leads us to the third bullet point, dependency status. So they're either independent or dependent. So unless they're one of those factors that makes them independent, then they're going to be filling out that dependency status form, and it's also provided by the school. Typically, when the student logs into the financial aid portal, they'll see a lot of links, and one of the links will be dependency status or the household size form. So a lot of schools have these forms online and they're easy to fill out. Just got to make sure to check that portal. So best practices, just to reiterate, check those portals often. And the student can also, or you can support the student to ask for an extension. So if there's something going on in the student's life that they're unable to submit these forms and they need a little bit more support, they can ask for an extension in a timely manner on those to-do list items if they anticipate current challenges or future challenges. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We are happy to help. All right, so getting back to that student portal, this is typically what it's going to look like. Each school, of course, is different, but sometimes UCs, they will look the same, or CSUs sometimes look the same. But overall, it's going to have this area where it says to-do list. So you see that red arrow. So currently this student has no to-dos. They've gotten their verification done, anything that they have to get done that might be having a hold on their accounts. So overall, it's important for viewing those to-do list items. It's important for seeing the verification and financial aid award letters, which we're going into in a later slide. And they can also see their admission status. And then also, if in the bottom left corner there, you can see view financial aid and accept decline awards. So that's where they're going to see that financial aid offer letter. And that's super helpful because this helps students decide where they want to go. So again, we have a further slide about that where we'll dig in a little bit more. But I just want to note that it's important to log into this portal and see the verification or any to-dos, because sometimes that financial aid award letter will not show up until those to-dos are done. So they're not logging into this way later. They're logging into this as soon as possible. So check it often and just note that it is a hiccup for students, so just be prepared for that. All right, so we talked about when a student is verified that the school is going to request either a W-2 or an IRS tax return transcript if the parent or student or guardian filed taxes. It's going to be an IRS tax return transcript is a document that shows the financial aid information for the requested tax year. It's always the prior year. And it's a summary of personal and financial information. You can order it online, mail, or phone. It takes about 7 to 10 days to arrive. This is the website, and we also have this QR code if you want to pull out your phone. I also just best practice, I go to Google and I type in IRS tax return transcript and it comes right up. So it's pretty easy. Okay, so this is a pretty dense slide. We are going to go through it together, and please feel free to ask any questions because there's a lot of good ways that we can receive these IRS tax return transcripts. So first off, there's the IRS data retrieval tool. So we talked a little bit about this. This is actually in FAFSA, so it's not in the California DREAM Act. And the parent and student can transfer tax information with the FSA ID. So if a student does the FAFSA and they have a parent who doesn't have an SSN, then they won't be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool. So we have some other options for them. Also, the IRS data retrieval tool, I just want to note that it can be pretty finicky and a little bit challenging. And I say this because say a student lives at 123 Apple Court, and the tax preparer wrote on the taxes court CT rather than COURT. So the student, when they're typing in their address or anything to that IRS data retrieval tool, it needs to exactly match what's on their taxes. And sometimes this is down to just a space, like down to 123 Apple Court space. And so it gets kind of tricky. If we don't add those things, then it says error, we can't pull up your taxes. So sometimes students get frustrated by this, but it's okay. We just want to remind them, hey, it's fine. This is only one way that we can do this. There's a ton of other ways. So just a note about that. So another way is to request a tax return transcript online. So a student can either do this by, of course, they're Googling, they're going to that website that we just showed the QR code, and they can either go to that website and create an account and download a PDF of that tax return transcript. But the only thing about this is that the parent or student must have a line of credit to create that account. So sometimes that's a hiccup. Or they can receive it through mail by 7 to 10 business days. So if they aren't able to create an account, then they request it through mail. And that's on that website. And again, that website is also a little challenging. Got to get that address completely correct. I found that the easiest option is to request that tax return transcript via phone. This is a great number to call, and it's the easiest option. It only asks for the student or the social security number and the addresses and the numbers and the address. So for instance, 123 Apple Court, you only have to type 123, and there's no issues making it exact like online. And you're going to receive this, the student is going to receive this in 7 to 10 business days. Sometimes we're working with students that moved and their address on their taxes is their previous address. So it's going to get sent to that house. So another way to do this is to request the tax return transcript or the proof of non-filer via a form, which is 4506T. And they can either mail in this form or fax in this form. And then on that form, they can write in the address that they would like it to be sent to instead of the address on the taxes. Let's go over what that proof of non-filer form is. So we talked about if students have to submit those W-2s instead of a tax return transcript, that's when they or their parents did not file taxes. So they're going to be asked for W-2s and verification of non-filer. So this form 4506T, there's a box that they can check off. Either you check off the box for the tax return transcript that they want to be sent or the proof of non-filer that they want to be sent. So that's another option that they can do. And then our last option is requesting a tax return transcript or proof of non-filer by going to the IRS office. So there's a couple different IRS office locations. And if a student is going in there and they're asking for a proof of non-filer or a tax return transcript from their parents, they can't just get that, right? They need authorization from the parent. So that 4506T form needs to be paired with that 8821 form. So that 8821 form needs to be signed by the parent to release authorization for the student to get a verification of non-filer or a tax return transcript. I've also put a number here to make an appointment. All right, so moving in and away from the financial aid piece of this verification, this is an affidavit for undocumented students, and it's an AB540 form. So it's very important that the student submits this to receive the non-resident tuition exemption. So if you've seen tuition for residents, it's a lot lower than the non-resident tuition, right? So sometimes a student will log into their portal and they'll see a very high amount for their tuition and get a little scared, but they need to submit that AB540, and then that tuition will be brought back to that resident-based fee. So in addition to the AB540, it sometimes is also paired with at a CSU, a residency questionnaire. So the school will request this document through the student portal, of course, in the to-do list section. And each campus has their own version, and students will not see a financial aid offer until it's in progress or completed. So we talked about how if a student is being verified for financial aid, they won't see that financial aid offer. And then also if they don't have that residency questionnaire. And so this can kind of be a holdup for students because they need that financial aid award letter, right? They need to see what school is giving them money. Clarify what exactly a financial aid offer letter is. This is typically what it looks like. It's a document that lists the cost to attend a given school, plus any financial aid the school is offering the student. So this helps the student and their family calculate their out-of-pocket costs. So it's a pretty important, there's a lot of factors that go into how a student chooses the college, and finance is one of them. So this financial aid offer letter is very important, and we want to make sure that we get that residency questionnaire or that verification complete so that we can see this financial aid offer letter before it comes time that they have to enroll or submit their intent to register at their chosen school. They're going to receive the offer letter shortly after they are accepted, providing that all the verification is complete at four-year schools. Community colleges, however, they will receive it in May or June. And where can a student view their offer letter? In a student portal or in the financial aid portal. Okay, so we are going to talk about 10,000 degree scholarships. So for the students in Marin and Sonoma, there's no GPA requirements. And also for our other counties, overall 10,000 degrees does not have a GPA requirement for the scholarship. And once they're in college, they have to maintain a 2.0. But in order to initially get that scholarship, there's no GPA, which is really great because sometimes the students who need it most have that low GPA and need that support. So we're aware of that and we want to support those students. So in addition to no GPA requirement, they need to be able to demonstrate a financial need. And part of the scholarship application is to write 2 short essays. Our scholarship questions are very similar to other scholarship questions. So we always recommend to students, save your scholarship essays because more than likely, you'll just have to tweak a couple things and then you can use the same essay to multiple different scholarships. So they have to submit the FAFSA or the California Dream Act application SAR. And if for some reason they don't submit the FAFSA or the California Dream Act application, there is an option for that. But we really want students to submit those financial aid applications. And then in addition to students in Marin or Sonoma, we have community college students or community college scholarships for students in Napa, West Contra Costa, San Francisco, or Santa Clara. And the requirements are the same, no GPA, demonstrate financial need, and they have to submit that FAFSA or California Dream Act. And for more information, they can always go to our 10,000 Degrees webpage, which we are going to explore with y'all, so you can see what that looks like. So on our webpage, there's actually a really good resource called Outside Scholarships. So other scholarships that they can apply to are a 10,000 Degrees Outside Scholarship webpage. They can also go to their high school, college, and career center for support. They can also go to their college's financial aid office and department website. They as well have an outside scholarship webpage similar to 10,000 Degrees. Students can apply for scholarships while in college. So sometimes students think that they have to apply their senior year, and they don't know that once they get to college that there'll be even more opportunities for them to apply to scholarships. So just reminding your students, like, this scholarship search, this hunt never ends, right? And we always want to make sure that we can get as many as we can by utilizing these resources. So this is the 10,000 Degrees Scholarship webpage. You're going to click students and then click the drop down and click scholarships. So this is how a student can apply to our scholarship, and scroll down. You'll see general scholarships to apply to our general scholarship. But I do want to show you a couple things. If you see the gray box where it says outside scholarships, so this is a whole list of scholarships that our previous students or current students have actually received. So it's a well-vetted list. Sometimes there's other resources that we don't really know if the student's going to receive it. These are real scholarships that our students have received. We list all of the deadlines and the website and the qualifications for the student. Okay, so this link at the top, scholarships for undocumented students, also want to show you this really great resource from Immigrants Rising. This is a whole list of scholarships for undocumented students. But what you'll need to do is in the keyword, you type in scholarships. And then if you scroll down, you'll see a list of undergraduate scholarships. So right there on the right. So once you click this, you can download a PDF that looks very similar to our 10,000 Degrees Outside Scholarships webpage. It has the deadlines, the websites. This is a really great resource. Just going down a rabbit hole of links, you find a lot of goodies. Yeah. And then this is a page, if you want to screenshot this or go to it in the slide deck, please follow us on Instagram. We have reminders, important deadlines, and information about our events, such as this training. And then we have like some fun stuff too about our students and everything. We have the accounts for high schools, community colleges, and our four-year university success team. But I just want to thank you all for being here.